Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Seven Figure Music School podcast. I'm Daniel, this is Nate, and in this episode, we are continuing our series on the myths of school ownership. And to give the big picture overview of what this series is about, is we're asking now, just over 180 episodes into this podcast, and ending 2025 and looking back at all of the episodes we've released for many, many years, we're asking the question, what is it? What myths still persist? What is it that school owners still believe after, the great content revolution of the last 10 years where everybody and their brothers had an opinion on things in this industry? What is it that we still encounter on a week-to-week basis? What are we seeing as the myths that school owners believe about growing a large school, about growing a successful school, profitable school? Because not every owner wants to get to 1,000 students, but every owner should feel as if it's possible to have a great take-home pay. What is it that's going to give an owner that? What is it that's going to help them feel fulfilled in their career? And what is standing in their way? And after all these episodes, we came up with 5 myths. And today we're on the 4th one. Last week, we talked about the marketing myth. Today, we're revisiting something that we actually did a pretty big series on about 6 months ago, but felt it was so important that we should revisit and talk about this topic again. And that is what I'll call, and we chose this title carefully, the culture blind spot. The culture blind spot being this idea that culture is something that is misunderstood, but yet somehow everyone knows they need to have it. And the error we see owners making is that they either ignore it completely or they give lip service to it, but don't really know how to do culture. Like, how do I create culture? What is culture? Isn't culture like the public facing image of our school? Isn't that what culture is, right? That's it, right? Actually, it isn't. Yeah. We'll talk about that. That's branding. But as we get into this episode, we want to look at this blind spot. And so we're going to start with maybe a little bit of a review of that big culture series we did in the summer. And in the show notes, we'll put the first episode. We'll put a link to that first episode, which we recorded at the beginning of April and then released, I think, May of this year, June of this year. We want to start by asking, what is culture? Giving a very brief definition. Why is it important? And then getting into the myth itself. Nate, very excited to meet here with you. We've been a little bit, we took a little bit of a break from the podcast for a while, starting in the fall, but we're coming to the end of the year strong. And I do want to remind you, I think today is the 4th anniversary of when we released the first podcast episode of this podcast. As we're recording it, not when we're releasing it, but it was December 1st, I'm pretty sure, of 2022 that we released the first podcast episode. It is now December 1st, 2025. So
congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations us. And the funny thing about the release of that first episode was we actually recorded it in March of 2022 and then waited 9 months to release it. I don't know if you remember that. You remember that?
That's okay. That's sometimes the way we work.
Yeah.
Quick draw, slow to pull the trigger.
Maybe so. We had a good idea and then we sat on it for a while.
Yeah.
But
I love this topic. So I think I'm just ready to dive straight in. I think culture is that. It's in many ways the secret sauce. It's the thing that really will change how you view your business as long as you want to run it.
Yeah, Nate, this is something that, to use the words that I gave earlier, I've done culture in my companies for a long time. It was meeting you that helped me to understand that I was doing it.
Nice.
I kind of reinvented the wheel in it. Like, I did culture accidentally, to be honest.
Right.
And it was only after meeting you that I really began to put a name and labels on what it was that I was doing. I kind of I backed into it accidentally. So I think you're the one that should lead off this episode. I'm just going to ask you, how do you define culture? What is culture?
Let me go with what we shared earlier because I think it's quite useful. We had a definition from previous episodes. Company culture is the collective identity of your organization. It's how we do things around here, right? It's like, this is how BMF operates. That's and It's our collective identity of Brooklyn Music Factory. It's the shared values and beliefs and behaviors, sort of the unspoken rules that govern how anyone on our team at BMF communicates and makes decisions and handles conflict and defines success. I will say, and I like this last piece especially, that as you really get comfortable with owning the culture of your music school, you get much more comfortable with owning the leadership role in your music school. And I think that's one of the keys here. And I'll actually go back to something, what you just said, Daniel. I remember that exact same feeling I had when culture was sort of impressed upon us. Actually, it was someone who was who had Jim Collins had been his coach for years and had coached the company, and then this company was now training BMF on culture in particular at this point. And I realized when he was describing culture, he was like, well, you're going to have to start with your core values, and then you're going to have to get into exactly how you apply those values. And then you're going to get into how those values inform your product suite and all these things. I was like, oh, wait, I definitely, from the moment that Pierre and I started BMF, we definitely had some core values. We just never knew that we were supposed to actually clarify them.
Exactly.
We never knew that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, back to what you said, I was like, oh, wait, we're supposed to actually sit down, codify these suckers, and formalize them, right?
Yes.
And then this idea of having like a very clear reason for being. And like, I remember, like, I had a tagline before I understood that it was inherently, it encaptured our culture when we said we inspire musicians and we build community. Like, we were saying that years before we went into training on culture, like years before I heard a pod like this. And I was like, oh, wait, probably a lot what you were saying or thinking rather. And it may have coincided with when you had visited Brooklyn. We were hanging out for the first time here, and you were sort of walking through BMF, and you were like, oh man, there's all these signs as to what the culture of this music school is supposed to be. You know, it's all over the place. Anyway,
Yeah.
So that last piece on culture is essential, which is that it's in there. Everybody here listening has a very intuitive sense of values and reason for their school existing or their studio existing. And it may just be that this is the pod that actually triggers you to put in the effort to codifying it and just owning it.
In just a second, I'm going to get into the why it's so important. And it could double as the reason why you shouldn't turn this episode off, because this is one of those abstract kind of very 50,000 foot ideas that has the danger of just becoming a very theoretical or conceptual episode. We're going to get into a lot of practicalities here, and I'm going to explain why it's so important. But I do want to, as you say, Nate, highlight something you just said, because you essentially said that you and Pierre did the same thing that I did. And to help those listening or watching on YouTube, I'll just say this. If you have very strong opinions about things in your school, and they are hills that you would die on, you are likely creating culture and not knowing it. If you feel like you don't have a lot of culture, but you have a lot of strong opinions, you have a lot of strong directionality, you probably have culture. And you are probably experiencing the benefits of that culture. And what I would say is that if you continue to listen to this episode or go back and listen to the series that we went really deep on in the summer, simply labeling and understanding what you're doing, putting terminology on it, and getting more intentional about it will make your school even stronger. But if you do not have strong opinions and you're not sure why you have certain programs, there isn't a reason for your existence beyond, you love music and you want to have a career, you have to pay your bills, you need to eat, have clothes, then you likely do not have a strong cultural footprint within your school. And again, I'm just going to reiterate this. Culture is not how you present yourself to the world. It is not. Culture is about, again, shared beliefs, behaviors, and standards within the school itself, behind closed doors. What happens then is the world perceives you in a certain way because of that. I'm going to give concrete examples. It involves your internal team and your leadership. So your internal team and leadership sets the culture and participates in that culture because you have set strong core values. And another word that I'm going to put here, decision-making guidelines for your school. If this, then that. Oh, if this happens, then this is what happens as a result of that. If someone is late on their payment, this is how we respond to them. If a staff member behaves this way in the community room, this is what we tell the staff member. Oh, by the way, these are the rules of how the staff should behave with our clients. This is how we conduct ourselves in meetings. This is our meeting schedule. We go out for drinks every Friday night after the work week is ended. And it's not mandatory, but everyone shows up. These are all the touchstones of culture. Again, the reputation you have as a result of that is going to be felt amongst your students and your families and the public in your community. And I mean like your geographical community. But again, it's set internally and it's participated in by the team. It spreads through your actions, the decisions you make, the norms that you set for the school. Some schools are very permissive on attendance. Some schools, you have 2 absences a year, period. After that, you're gone. And the result that is felt is ownership in your team and consistency in the team. Okay, so as we get into it, and again, defining what it is and wanting to get into the why, what I just want to say is that I hope you're beginning to get a sense of the actions that need to be taken to set these things. This is about what's going on internally. And as a good first step, you can write this down, deciding what your core values are of your school, deciding what the decision-making guidelines are of the school. If a team member faces an uncertain situation, how do they make a decision? The stronger your culture is, the clearer that answer is going to be for them. And before we go into the why, which I've already begun to get into, Nate, is there anything else you want to add to the what is culture or comment on anything I just said there?
No, I just think that your directionality comment is a really important one for everyone to listen to, because I would argue there's nobody listening here that doesn't have some real sense of direction in their studio. They may be totally overwhelmed and feel like they're putting out fires and can't figure out how to make money. And there could be all kinds of issues around just running a business. But my guess is that everybody listening to the pod can remember the sort of fundamental why behind taking on those first students and what they hope to achieve with them, and sort of that sense of like accomplishment and what was so fulfilling. And that's that directionality you're talking about. Like people always ask at BMF, like, how did you know to make all the choices you made? And I tell a really simple story, which was like I had just gotten fired from this music production gig. I was working in television and film forever,
right.
And so here I was without a gig, and I decided I was going to try teaching again. And I started teaching again, and basically within like the first month of teaching a bunch of students that of course came through here in Brooklyn, the Playground Network, mostly through my courtesy, friends of my daughters at the time. I realized right away that if I were going to teach again, I would want to teach the way that I learned, that worked for me, rather than try to follow a pedagogy that was sort of dictated to me. And so there were only 2 fundamental rules. Number 1, there had to be tons of games. It had to be like lots of ear training and music theory games, because that's what I loved. And number 2, all my students had to play with each other. I was like, why? Because music theory, my AP Harmony class in high school, was the thing that completely changed my life. It was the thing that I fell in love with. So I was like, okay, there's going to be loads of theory, And then secondly, I was like, my happiest memories of being a musician are always performing with others. They were always in the context of playing in different bands. So I was like, well, okay, those are the sort of the fundamental, that's the ethos of this place. Right. And so I remember very vividly, Daniel, like that first couple months of literally putting on the shelf a bunch of the like Faber books and stuff that I had picked out to teach out of, and being like, sorry, I'm putting you to bed. We're going to start over and we're just going to do it we're going to do it my way, and that's that culture directional piece you're talking about. Our listeners don't have to make it up. You're not supposed to. You're discovering what exists within you when you find those values, like you said, when you start to think about exactly why you're building the school and putting in all the effort. The last thing I'll say, and ping it back to you, because you've got some great perspectives on culture here from some heavy business thinkers too, which I'm excited for our listeners to hear. But the last thing I'll say is that when you start to double and triple down on the culture, as Daniel's talking about, so many of those other facets of your company that you're trying to learn how to do, everything from reconciling your QuickBooks to invoicing consistently to figuring out your makeup policy, those things become lighter. They don't become easier, right? You still have to solve those puzzles, but you don't take them on as with the same weight. They don't hurt as much, right? Because you know that there's a foundational why behind solving all those puzzles, right? If you solve invoicing, you'll have better cash flow. If you have better cash flow, you can deliver on your why. You can build that culture more effectively.
To wrap this up and then go into the why it's so important, I will just give a short list of things, that action points you can do to set strong culture as you head into 2026. 1, define your core values and decision-making guidelines. I will put in the show notes, perhaps even a download to the core values and decision-making guidelines document that I had for my personal music studio. The last time I'd updated it, because obviously I haven't been teaching for a while, I'm gonna put the last version of it that I had, which is from maybe 8 years ago. It's a very strong document because it can feel a little abstract. Wait, what are core values? You will read this and you will instantly understand what's going on and why that exists, why that document exists. It is an extension of who I am and why my music studio existed. And you can feel my personality and my passion and my drive for teaching in that core value document. And the decision-making guidelines document was so that anybody who worked with me in the studio, because I had essentially an operations manager co-running the studio with me. She was 24 years old and very motivated, very bright, very hardworking. She didn't know how I thought when we first met. The decision-making guideline document helped her to make a light years jump to understanding the purpose of the business and how I would make decisions in it. That, and here's another culture piece, which I'm going to get to in a second, that combined with meeting me on a regular basis helped get her up to speed very, very quickly. So you can read that document. That's the first thing. Second, understand your mission and your purpose. And we have created a whole bunch of episodes on this podcast about mission and purpose and how to create it, how to know what yours is, how to surface it if you're not sure how to put it into words. And we'll also put in the show notes, we do this quite often, the podcast episode guide. And you can go to the section of the podcast episode guide that talks about this particular topic. And you will see all the episodes around mission and purpose. That's another one. Third action item is just to be comfortable in your leadership. Strong leadership makes up for a lot. And what I will just say is that if you do not have these previous 2 items, the very first act of your leadership should be to take responsibility for those in the closing weeks of 2025 and get this set for 2026. And if you have questions about this, if you don't know how to do this, if you feel uncomfortable how to surface this, email me, Daniel@greatmusicstudio.com. We can have a conversation about how to get clear on this as you go into 2026. That's the next thing. And what I will also say is that this coming Friday, that we are doing a special webinar just around the idea of annual planning. So just 2 days from now, you can register for that. It'll also be in the show notes of this podcast, or you could catch the replay if you're listening to this podcast much, much later.
This episode is sponsored by BigMusicGames.com. As our listeners know, Brooklyn Music Factory is all about a fun, fluency-first approach to music lessons. And at the foundation of our teaching methods are rhythm, melody, harmony, and songwriting games that challenge students as young as 4 years old to train their ears and flex that musical mind. Because when you set an intention of gamifying every single lesson, you're going to find improved attendance, increased play at home, and higher student retention. So we've set up a website just for our listeners so you can start playing today. Go to bigmusicgames.com/7FMS and create your free account. Again, that's bigmusicgames.com/7FMS. And if you join today, I'm going to send you a personal invite to join our weekly teacher training call with me and Greggy Bizzle, our chief game designer. Go ahead and put play back into practice with Big Music Games.
We've kind of stolen the thunder from the next point, so I'm going to be briefer on this. Otherwise, this is going to drag out to an hour, Nate. But I'm going to do a very quick flyover of the why this is so important, although we've talked about it so much at this point that it will just need to be a quick flyover because we've really hit it hard. And then, Nate, if you have thoughts on this, would love to hear them, but I'm just going to give the quick flyover real fast. The negative and the positive. The negative, if you do not have culture in the school, if you do not set this invisible force field that binds and connects everything together, you're going to have resentment between leadership and teachers, admin and teachers. There will be no shared values. So people will show up to the job site, people will show up to work, they'll teach the kids, but they won't know why they're doing it. And over time, that saps the energy, or, at best, at worst, people just see it as a paycheck. And they don't feel as if they're a part of something bigger. And people really need that purpose to invest as much time as someone does in their career into a place, into a business, your business. Okay? On the worst end of the spectrum, you'll see teachers stealing students from you. You'll see people stealing time from you, people being lazy, not following the guidelines of the school. It being this very top-down approach where it's like, hey, just do what I say, which tends to sap people's motivation over time. And going back to our very first myth, there's overlap between this. Every problem will escalate to you, the owner, because no one knows how to solve problems around there except you. And so it becomes this unfortunate situation where people don't want to work for an autocrat. They don't want to work for a dictator, but you kind of have to be the dictator because no one knows how to do things. And so everything escalates to you. That's kind of the negative side. Before I go to the positive side, Nate, do you want to comment on any of these negatives? No?
I just want to say that I'm going to add one addition to that. You said you end up having a bunch of teachers that show up just for the paycheck, or the conversation is always around pay when it comes time to sort of renew a contract, et cetera. I remember when I was being taught on this, one of the suggestions made to me that we actually adopted for a number of years was about a month into hiring a new teacher, you offer them $1,000 to leave. You say, is this the right values fit for you? Do you think you're in the place that you want to be for the next few years? If not, we'll pay you. I think they offered like $2,000 an employee, but we couldn't afford that at the time. But we offered employees $1,000 to leave. Like if it doesn't feel, if you don't really believe in in our purpose, our mission, what we're doing, and the values that we are, teaching from, then we offered some. I can't remember what we actually offered, but it might have been $1,000. And what's fascinating to me about that story is that when I first heard it, I was so shocked. You're like, but it took so much effort to hire this person. Now you're going to pay them to leave. And he's like, no, that's how important culture is.
And I will also make the point that is even making the decision to make that offer to a teacher is culture.
Yeah, totally.
It's totally culture, because it's a culture of accountability for leadership, making sure that they're taking the hiring process seriously and believe in their own hiring process. And then it's putting the money where your mouth is, and showing through a real gesture that, hey, if you don't believe you belong here, we actually don't want you here. We want you to be on board. And so if you'd rather take the $1,000 and leave and go get another job, then hit the road. We obviously made a bad decision here. That is such a great example of culture and enforcing the culture.
Yeah. And I liked your follow-up comment, because what it did for us as a leadership team is it made us pause for a moment and be like, okay, if we're actually going to do this, then we actually have to believe in our culture. We actually have to believe in what we're saying.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it gives you that moment of just like, there's no, you can't backpedal. You can be like, actually, it's cool if you're mostly on board. Why don't you just stay and test it out for one more month? You're right. You got to take it all in.
Yeah.
And the all in piece, you hear that all the time, and we've talked about that a bunch on the pod. But with culture, you're not. This isn't like a 60% thing. You're not like, eventually I'll get it right. It's back to like one of your earlier comments in this pod. It's like, no, it's there. You're going to uncover it. You're going to codify it, and you're going to start declaring it, from the top of the mountain, daily, weekly, monthly, to your team, and how important it is. So it's an 100%, right?
Yeah. The positive side. Okay, so we gave the negative. If you don't take care of culture, these are some of the negatives you will experience. And if you hear a description of your school and those negatives, then you got your work cut out for you. But at least now you have correctly diagnosed the illness. Let's give the positive side. Here's what you get when you take culture seriously. It drives greater performance amongst your team at their role. Your teachers will be better. Your directors will be better. Your admins will be better. Your marketers will be better, because the team is energized around a common and shared purpose. They're driven by values, and they know how to make decisions. So, of course, they're going to move faster, and they'll take more ownership. One of the signs that I know we're doing culture right is I have consistently heard from team members in the various businesses that I've been involved in for the last 10 years, whether it was my studio, Piano Express /grouplessons.com, Grow Your Music Studio, 7FMS, all these entities I've been involved in, I've consistently heard feedback from team members like, this is the most organized place I've ever worked for. I'm excited to be here. I wouldn't quit this job. I've literally had team members tell me this. Tell me they're excited about what we are doing. Say they love coming to work. This is a sign of really good culture. Energized people are productive people, and they're people who do good work. So there's that. It reduces micromanagement on your part. Even with lower level team members that I've hired, and Nate, you can obviously jump in here and give your own examples too. But we hired someone a year and a half ago, and then kind of promoted him and gave him more responsibility and more hours in the summer of this past year. So he's been about 6 months, and he's literally making decisions. And I've got a layer between me and him. I barely have interaction with him, but the report I'm getting through Bethany is that he's making decisions and doing things on his own that we never asked him to do, but are very, very positive. He's taking more responsibility than we even gave him. So it's the flip side of micromanagement. Not only are we not having to micromanage, we're actually getting more than what we bargained for. And I, again, see this consistently amongst my team members, is that they're kind of always reaching up. They're wanting to expand what they're doing. And so I have less to do. Thank God, because I've got way too much to do.
Yeah.
Nate, I can tell you want to say something.
Well, I'm just going to add to it that, like, there's this fascinating moment that you have, listeners, as owners, which is that you started a thing, and you started a thing because you really wanted to build something. You're a builder. There's no entrepreneur that isn't a builder, you know? And so you get kind of jazzed by getting to build this thing. But then, to Daniel's point, actually more and more stuff starts falling apart around you as you go from 40 students to 75 students and hire your first 3 teachers and things like that. Next thing you know, you're trying to solve this puzzle and that puzzle. So we just all assume in the early years of running our studio that because we're the builder, we're also the problem solver, we're also the designer of everything, that we're supposed to have our hand on absolutely everything. Right? And so there is a fundamental inflection point in your company and in yourself as a founder when you start realizing that you have put enough culture in place, that you've hired the right people, that you can start releasing your grip from more and more of the puzzles and actually allow other people to come up with solutions on how to break through that 150 to 250 student barrier or that 250 to 350 student barrier. It's quite difficult to recognize when you're at the inflection point, but it is like you just said, Daniel, it is such a massive relief once you actually release the grip and let other people start solving some of the issues that you may have been able to solve on your own eventually.
Yeah.
If and so this is that like real benefit that you're talking about, Daniel. It's like beyond getting stuff done efficiently. To me, the part that's really beautiful is when, for example, we're doing a fundraising concert this weekend and we need to sell 300 tickets and we're at like 200 right now. It's a Monday. I've got a 6-day countdown to move another 100 tickets. And as soon as we're done recording the pod, I have like a 30-minute meeting with Mary Lee, and I'm just going to give her a couple of ideas, and then I'm going to leave it in her lap and just say, give me a sales update every single day on how much closer we are to moving those final 100 tickets. And I'm very confident that she will sell the final 100 tickets. And it's just really feels energizing to me as a founder or co-founder to know that we have all these different people in positions at BMF that can take care of these once only Nate problems to solve, So I wanted to add that because you will find, and it's, even if it's hard to believe right now, if you're listening, you will find that as your culture strengthens, there will be people that want to come solve issues that maybe have been hanging you up for years.
I love that. What I want to add on to what you're saying is myth 1 and myth 4 go together very well. They're paired like a good wine with a meal. Because delegation is so it can't happen without good culture. It just can't. And it was hard to talk about on the first episode of the series. It was hard to talk about that without getting into culture. And now being in the culture episode, it's hard to talk about without getting into delegation. Yeah. And your comments right there, Nate, perfectly encapsulated that. I think it really showed that. So I just kind of want to point that out. One last thing in terms of why this is so important. It attracts and retains the right people. As you said earlier with the $1,000 comment, it repels the wrong fits, and it's a magnet for those who thrive in what you're trying to create. And, we've said in some of our hiring episodes that hiring is really just good marketing. And what creates good marketing is talking about your purpose, your mission, your values, those sorts of things. And, you set those things, you lead them strongly, and you're going to get people who are very attracted to what it is you're doing. To push the food analogy even further, imagine some kind of slop or goop, that essentially has nutrients in it, but, it's essentially a meal kit. It's rations, emergency rations, versus a really, really tasty dinner. You want your culture, you want your business to feel like that tasty dinner that has strong flavor. Not just some kind of slop or goop that you're putting on a plate that technically could nourish you, but isn't a very enjoyable experience. And when you put a strong flavor out in the world, a strong aroma, so to speak, it will attract certain people and will push away others. Maybe pheromones would be a better analogy, but let's not go there. This episode is sponsored by GroupLessons.com. If you're looking for a group piano method that is easy to implement in your studio or school, look no farther than Piano Express from grouplessons.com. Because unlike most group piano methods, Piano Express allows students to make individual progress within the context of a larger group. And because of the at-home practice tools and gamified curriculum, students using the Piano Express method make faster progress than the average method book student. And that helps students feel excited, accomplished, and motivated to learn new music. Also, the system is really adaptable. We've got teachers using the system in their home studios, and we have many large commercial studios running our 3-room model that allows you to see up to 24 students per hour with just 2 teachers. So if you'd like to learn more about Piano Express, navigate to grouplessons.com and sign up for a free demo. You'll get to look at the method, our app and teacher guides, and we'll even give you a sneak peek of our implementation plan that has helped hundreds of studios start their group program in just a few weeks. So, Nate, in some of the past episodes, we've gotten deep into the misconceptions and realities. I think we've kind of already hit those. Maybe we kind of wrap up right now. And I wonder what thoughts you have in kind of wrapping up, because I definitely have something I want to hit people hard with at the end, since this can be a more abstract concept. But are there any last thoughts that you have?
I want to give one other, we listed one other really nice benefit from culture, and I just want to share this. Your school, no matter how well run it is going to come into problems at some point. There are unforeseeable issues around the corner at some point. Every company in every industry will have challenges. And if you have a strong culture, if your teachers know why they're there, why they've been there for 5 years, if your school manager knows why she's been there for even longer, if your part-time admins know why they're there and why they someday hope to become full-time, you've created this culture that's so strong that when you do actually have a deep challenge to your school, it could be any number of things. It could be a staff member getting, really ill. It could be, any number of things can happen, right? You lose your lease unexpectedly. Your strong culture is what actually is going to hold that team together and keep everyone optimistic that this thing, it's worth getting over this hurdle. It's worth getting through the challenge. We literally, I don't know if we did enough. I think we did a glancing episode at this, but Brooklyn Music Factory has been removed from their long-term lease not once but twice. So there was a 6-month period where we were homeless, renting out everything from basements of a brownstone to rehearsal spaces, literally walking kids down the Brooklyn streets from one rehearsal back to a private lesson. And that it seemed like almost an insurmountable challenge, except for that we felt our culture was so strong that we could bring the team together around why it was so important to get through this. And then, of course, they all helped us get through it, because here we are many years later, still thriving, et cetera. So that's the only other thing I wanted to close with, was that you don't know when you're going to really need to lean on team until that day arrives. And then you're like, wait, I can't take this on alone. And culture is the difference between having to take it on alone versus knowing you're going to make it to the other side in one piece.
Okay, love that. My closing salvo is going to be to fulfill the promise I gave at the very beginning, and that is to get practical. And we have gotten practical, but I just want to drop it all right here because it kind of scattered throughout. And so I want to give people some things to think about, some things to do, some things to create. And I use that word intentionally. The coach I've been working with this year, 2025, his thing is creation, the idea of creating something out of nothing. There was nothing before, there is something now. And the idea that creation is an intentional act. You create your life, you create your business, you create the family you want, the income you want. And it's high responsibility, radical ownership type stuff, Here's some things that you can create and the byproduct will be strong culture within your school. All right. So I'm just going to rattle some things off. Some of these are a repeat from early in the episode, but I want you to hear it all here now, and as a kind of, again, a closing, a strong close, I guess. A core values document, defining the things that are most important to you and the school and the business, right? A mission or vision statement, a clear why behind your school's existence. You can go back to the culture series we did earlier this year. We did a whole episode on this. A staff handbook. If you do not have one, the creation of a staff handbook, a readable guide on how we do things here, the rules, that creates culture. So this is just in the vision and values category. In terms of hiring, strong job descriptions, interview scorecards, job scorecards. So you hired for a certain thing. Now we're scoring how you're doing on those things we hired you for. Even what you're choosing to score people on is a cultural decision. Okay. Onboarding checklist. Of course,
values-based scorecards.
Yes.
Sorry, that's all I'm saying. We use them, and they say, and we'll even performance reviews that are based on values.
Yeah.
So sorry, you're on a flow. Keep flowing.
No, it's good. It's good. An onboarding checklist or strong training. Again, at Grow Your Music Studio and Piano Express, we have a very, very strong training series. We train people on very specific things that will make them good at this job. And when they come out the other end of it, they are already a better worker than they came in at. Not having been on the job even more than one day, they're already better because of the training we put them through. We don't do this as much here. It's probably something I want to focus on, but I'll just mention it. A PDP, a professional development plan, clear growth pathways within your organization. So this is just within hiring and team development. In terms of systems and decision-making, you have those decision-making guidelines I was talking about earlier. A role chart or organizational chart, just creating that and who's responsible for what is a culture-making thing. A code of conduct, what's expected and what's tolerated. Doing background checks at your school on all team members. That is a culture decision. If you're not doing that, you should. A performance review rhythm and a template for it. That is a culture decision. And then kind of wrapping up here around the idea of meetings. So a meeting rhythm. How often do you have them? What kind of meetings do you run? What is the format of those meetings? Feedback loops within the school. Space. So this is space for team input. Surveys. Nate, I know you do them at BMF. One-on-ones. Open forums for team. How you do annual planning. This is part of making culture. Communication guidelines. So how you use project management software. How you use Slack. When you expect your team to check these things. How often do they check email? We have a cultural thing within Piano Express, grouplessons.com, where the support email has to be cleared by 5 p.m. every day, period. That is a culture decision. And we have literally had conversations with team members because they let something fester for a few days and didn't deal with it. Bethany wasn't checking it. I wasn't checking it. It wasn't our job. And then something blew up in our face because the person who was responsible for that didn't handle it. That is a culture decision. Last thing. This is getting a little bit more into, how do I put this? Extras, I guess. So team shout outs or a wins channel, right? So we publicly praise behavior that fits within the mission and vision of our organization. And we publicly praise people for things that are within the values or decision-making guidelines as people do them. And having a culture of calling people out for good things, right? Traditions, and this can even get into, Nate, I know that you guys have a tradition. And actually, you should speak to this. Traditions around staff going out to do things together. I mean, I'd love for you to speak to that just a little bit. What do you guys do at BMF?
Well, we do some simple things where we free bagels, coffee, all that kind of thing before every once a month all staff. That's huge, about just like trying to get them to all make the hang together. But then we started noticing that they are oftentimes all just going out to lunch together, like after the all staff, encouraging that. I remember, just as a funny side note, being like wanting to go to lunch with them and then being like, better for culture if I don't go, if their boss doesn't join them for lunch. I mean, even though they would have been fine and the hang would have been good, it's not the same, right? Other things we do is we have open bars, so we'll pay for drinks for an hour or two on a Friday, that kind of thing. It's just like little, none of this is rocket science, but what you're doing is you're trying to encourage a community there.
Yes, but you might have just blown people's mind. Like, wait, I'm going to spend $350 to pay for drinks for everyone on the team on a Friday night? And it's just like, even doing that a couple times a year would be massive for growing so much organic goodwill between team members and leadership, between team members and the business. By, free drinks is the hook, right?
Right. Free food what you usually get folks.
Yes, free food will get people out. They'll make the hang. But then what happens as a result of that is massive. It's just absolutely massive. And then literally the very last thing is what I'll call shared language. If you as the leader continue to say the same things over and over and over and over and over and over again, and there are meetings and hangs where you have opportunity for people to hear you saying those things over and over and over and over again, what begins to happen is that phrases that reinforce the values of the business start showing up in the language and in the belief system of the people who work for you, who work with you.
Yes.
And so language creates your world is what one of my coaches always said. And it also is what contributes to reinforcing and creating the culture of the business. And then what you'll find over time is that the culture morphs and evolves because the people you hired actually morph and evolve it. And the business actually begins to take shape without your presence and actually even begins to turn into something better than what you could have imagined because they understand the core values, the mission, the vision that you have, they own it. And then there's this weird alchemy that happens where who they are and who you've developed them to be then begins to take on a life of its own. And the business becomes something bigger than you are. And that is the biggest benefit of culture.